Assalamu alaikum everyone. We are back with another lecture on the history of English literature. Today we are going to talk about Renaissance literature. So, before we dive into history, let's warm up with a quick quiz. I will call out a few names, and if you recognize them, just raise your hand or try to memorize them. Okay, ready? First is Leonardo da Vinci. Second, William Shakespeare. Third, Galileo Galilei. So, did you recognize any of them? Da Vinci, the Italian artist and polymath most famous for having painted the Mona Lisa. Shakespeare, said to be the greatest dramatist of all time, having written a total of 39 plays, expanding to a wide range of genres in one lifetime. And lastly, Galileo, known as the father of modern science, pioneered the observational scientific method still used today. Now, let me ask you one question. What do these men have in common? They were all part of the same period in European history, a period we call the Renaissance. This was not just a time of art and science, it was also a period of powerful literature. The Renaissance was like Europe's digital revolution, except instead of smartphones and social media, they had books, plays, and poetry leading the way. So, now, let's go to the historical background of this particular period, then we will go towards the nitty-gritty of the literature behind it. The word Renaissance means rebirth. It began in Italy in the 14th century and spread to the rest of Europe, reaching England around the 16th century. But what exactly was being reborn? It was the knowledge and culture of ancient Greece and Rome. After centuries of what Europeans often call the Middle Ages, we discussed that last time, society started looking back to classical philosophy, art, and literature and began to revive them in new ways. This period also coincided with major historical changes. The age of exploration saw Columbus sail to America in 1492 and Gama reached India in 1498. These were major events. Science was flourishing with figures like Galileo and Copernicus, challenging traditional beliefs about the universe. And most importantly for literature, Gutenberg's invention of the printing press around 1450 completely transformed how ideas spread. Before the printing press, books were handwritten, like we discussed last time, and they were extremely expensive and limited to the elites like priests, kings, and knights only. With the press, books could be produced quickly and cheaply, giving more people access to knowledge. Just imagine, overnight, internet access in Pakistan became free for everyone, even in remote villages. That's how revolutionary the printing press was for Renaissance Europe. Now, let's talk about the characteristics of this particular literature. What made Renaissance literature different? First, it explored humanism. Humanism is the focus on humanity, not just society. Instead of focusing on religious topics, writers began exploring human experiences, emotions, and individuality. Literature became less about divine authority and more about what it means to be human. Renaissance literature also emphasized on individualism. Writers celebrated personal feelings and expressions. Think of Shakespeare's sonnets. These are deeply personal poems reflecting on love, beauty, time, and mortality, what it means to be human at its core. Third, Renaissance writers also admired the classics. They borrowed literary forms and ancient Greece and Rome, like epic poetry and tragic drama, but reshaped them for their own times. Finally, there was an intense curiosity and spirit of exploration. Writers reflected the broader curiosity of the age, scientific discovery, global travel, and new ideas. Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, for example, is about a man who sells his soul to the devil in exchange for limitless knowledge, but there's a price to be paid. That reflects the excitement and danger of pushing the boundaries of human understanding. what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Now, let's move towards the key writers and their works in this particular time period. The key figures of Renaissance literature. The very first one we are going to discuss is the man on which we have an entire age, William Shakespeare. He is perhaps the most famous writer in the English language. His plays reflect the Renaissance interest in human capacity and complexity. In Hamlet, for example, the character struggles with questions about life and death. To be or not to be? That is the question. In Macbeth, Shakespeare explores ambition and how power can corrupt. In Romeo and Juliet, he shows how personal love clashes with social duties. These themes are universal, which is why his plays are still performed today. They have been adapted and readapted multiple times. Next is Christopher Marlowe. A contemporary of Shakespeare, Marlowe's most famous play is Dr. Faustus. It tells the story of a scholar who is so hungry for knowledge and power that he makes a deal with the devil. The play represents the Renaissance spirit of ambition but also warns about overachieving beyond human limitations. Next is Edmund Spenser. He wrote an epic, The Faerie Queene. It's an epic poem that blends fantasy, moral lessons, and national pride into one. His work shows how Renaissance writers often mixed entertainment with instructions. Next is Sir Thomas More. He wrote Utopia, a political and philosophical work imagining a perfect society based on justice and equality without any problem. The word utopia has entered our everyday language to describe any ideal society. We still use this word today to talk about societies that are problem-free. Pakistan itself, at the time of independence, was imagined as a kind of utopia, a land of justice and opportunities. But like you know, in Pakistani history, every utopia has a drawback. There's nothing perfect. As long as we are humans, there is going to be a flaw. Next, before we move towards the next segment, let's have a little pause and think and reflect a little bit. Shakespeare once wrote, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." Do you agree? Do you sometimes feel that in society we are all performing roles assigned to us? Student, daughter, son, teacher, just like actors. Think about it. We are all actors in our own life. Now, let's come back to the lecture. We are going to discuss the impact of printing press. We cannot underestimate the printing press. It made books affordable and ideas accessible. Literacy rates grew. People who were once excluded from knowledge, farmers, merchants, artisans, could now read and write. The Renaissance would not have spread without this technology. Compare this with smartphones. In Pakistan today, in villages where no one owned a library, now students can access lectures like right now, books, and even university courses online. The printing press was the smartphone of the Renaissance. Now, why did Renaissance matter and why are we still studying and talking about it today? Why should we in Pakistan today care about Renaissance literature? First, it shaped English language. Many words and expressions we use daily come from this period. Second, the themes are timeless. Ambition, love, morality, curiosity, freedom, the struggle of being human. All of these reminds us that questioning, exploring, and imagining are essential parts of human progress. We cannot succeed if we do not have the curiosity and the will to change ourselves. If we are stuck in the belief that we are perfect, there will be no development. Just as Europe rediscovered itself during the Renaissance, Pakistan too constantly redefines its identity and culture. Literature helps us reflect on who we are and who we want to be. So, in that way, literature connects past to present and to the coming future. Renaissance was more than just an artistic period. It was Europe's intellectual awakening, a time when people rediscovered curiosity, questioned authority, and celebrated human potential, what we are capable of as human beings. In our own context, as students in Pakistan, Renaissance literature teaches us the importance of asking questions, exploring ideas, and finding our own voices in a world that is constantly changing. So, to conclude this lecture, let's recap a little bit. Today we talked about Renaissance. Renaissance is the time period of change, rebirth, and we are basically talking about European context. But keep in mind, Renaissance was not just a movement in Europe. It was a movement that revolutionized the entire world. It was a movement that brought a change throughout centuries to come. It brought about a change. There were artists, artisans, farmers, technology, sciences, everything expanded and it transformed the world that we know today. Renaissance, even though the time period is gone, it has been a few centuries till we use this term Renaissance. But whenever there's a revolutionary change in the world, that's a renaissance or a revolution of ideas in its own way. Like when smartphones came for the first time, it was a renaissance in Pakistani culture. Then when we had included into studies, that was also an evolution, a revolution that brought a renaissance that was entirely different from the previous era. So Renaissance is the time period and also the movement that explores rebirth and also reappreciation of human tendency towards change. It teaches us that no matter what, as long as we have a curiosity and will to learn something, we have different platforms. We have different ways to have that knowledge. And it also teaches us that there's nothing wrong with being imperfect, because being imperfect is part of being humans. As humans, we have that tendency towards sins. We have that tendency towards having done certain things that we are ashamed of. But at the end of the day, these experiences help us transform and help us grow. Writers like Shakespeare or Marlowe teaches us that humans have always been curious. We have always been battling the questions like, what is the purpose of our life? Is our existence valid? What are we living for? Even centuries ago, people were asking these questions. And I think even today we are asking this question. So the question about our existence is nothing new. And Renaissance shows that. Talking about the change in language, Renaissance also transformed the way people looked towards language as a medium of entertainment. Most of the plays written during that time were not just for instruction, they were not to criticize morality or churches like the previous movements or the coming movements. They were primarily to entertain you. So the main aim of literature is to entertain someone, and while entertaining someone, if you can educate someone, that's the best outcome. Renaissance teaches and shows that way of education, where you can be entertaining while also teaching something. That is all for today's lecture. See you in next lecture. Allah Hafiz.